we would like to invite up to the stage Dr. Anita Borja Enriquez, who is a creative strategist and a staunch supporter of transforming lives and advancing communities, including small island communities. She founded her first business at the age of 19 and several consulting firms. She is the co-founder of her recent startup, Guam Treasures LLC. Dr. Enriquez currently serves as Senior Vice President and Provost at the University of Guam. As former Dean of the School of Business and Public Administration, she secured multiple federal technical assistance grants to establish the Pacific Center for Economic Initiatives, the Guam Procurement Technical Assistance Center, the Guam Veterans Business Outreach Center, and the Think, Support, Buy Local Guam educational campaign, which propelled a movement to promote and support Guam-based artists and producers as a local economic development strategy. Dr. Enriquez has and continues to serve on multiple boards and commissions, including founding Vice President of the Guam Women's Chamber of Commerce, former member of the Guam Department of Chamorro Affairs, past president of the Rotary Club of Pago Bay, former member of the Guam Education Board, president of the Guampedia Board, and many others. Please let us welcome to the stage now Dr. Anita Borja Enriquez.
Buenas din hafa day. It's great to be here, and most folks who see me, they recognize me as being somebody from the University of Guam. And I've been with the University of Guam for a long time, but I'm not here in that capacity. I was asked to speak to you, all of you experts, in my capacity as chair of the Guam Land Use Commission. And as I reported to Executive Secretary, Director of the Department of Land Management, Mr. Joseph Borja, please don't judge me, Mr. Borja. I am here to provide some general strategic perspectives as someone who has engaged in facilitating many strategic planning sessions. And so these are just perspectives that I felt were something that Mr. Edwin Regis from BSP thought I should share. But the theme for the two-day symposium, creating spaces that empower communities through good design, sustainable development, economic vibrancy, and wise stewardship of our natural and cultural resources, aligns very well with the American Planning Association's stated goal of land use planning, that is to further the welfare of people and their communities by creating convenient, equitable, and the emphasis on equitable, healthful, efficient, and attractive environments for present and future generations. And I believe that the reason why you are all here, because in some degree of participation that in your jobs, and certainly with your passion and your intent of wanting to do what you can to work collaboratively to do what we can to advance our community. So the title of my presentation is Land Use Planning, Strategic Perspectives. And if I could just have you move on to the next slide. I always think about the need for constantly scanning your environment. And there are a couple of ways in which we do this, from both the micro level, that is understanding everything within your organization and within your own respective ecosystem of your existence as an agency or as a private firm or as an NGO, knowing who your partners are, knowing who your suppliers, knowing who your stakeholders are. All of these represent what is within your microenvironment, but most importantly, I think about the need to scan your macro environment as we think about the constraints, the external forces that have some sort of impact, whether it be a negative impact to serve as a threat or constraint, or perhaps a potential positive impact with regard to opportunity. So if you could click once. So I feel like I'm teaching the capstone MBA course on business strategy and policy. But I think about these various macro environmental forces that we take for granted. And we certainly don't take for granted the state of our economy, the economic situation. And so, we think about the experts. I don't profess to be the expert. I did see Dr. Roseanne Jones, an economist whom we've always looked forward to her perspective based on what she's able to convey about the state of the economy. Another one is our development economist, Dr. Clarette Ruane, both very highly competent professors at the School of Business and Public Administration, but who have also been engaged at more the macro level of participation in helping us to understand the state of the economy. And so in this regard, we recall a study that Dr. Jones had shared with regard to the state of what people were experiencing during the pandemic. And one of the most significant findings was that the folks who were the most negatively impacted were working Chamorro mothers. And that was a very enlightening piece of information, because then it forced us to pause and think about, well, what are some of these particular support systems that could be provided in order to address that particular issue. So we see issues that arise based on data, based on studies, based on input. Another interesting presented feature about the state of our economy was that with regard to inflation. And in 2021 feature by Dr. Clarette Ruane with regard to the high costs of living, how very expensive it was for goods, the delays in shipping, access to affordable goods. And she noted that inflation rate, albeit the Guam inflation rate was 2 percentage points lower than what was reported for the United States in general, you have to think about the context. Because when you realize that in certain sectors, wages or salaries are flat, and have been flat for not just one, but for maybe 2 decades. And so you have this inequity, this disparity with regard to livelihoods and affordability. And so it crosses over all aspects of folks and their ability to afford being and living in the current economy. And thank goodness for that windfall of federal funds that came in from the federal government to sort of offset the what we knew and what we were really, really worried about with regard to less government revenues to support just our basic government agencies and support other aspects. But we see a number of different initiatives coming down from the current administration, and certainly the military, just the huge capacity of the buildup and other support that has come in terms of dollars because of our whole geographic situation, especially when we think about national defense. And so I just wanted to touch on that really quick. But as planners, as members in this planning ecosystem, the one thing that we can't take for granted is that we can't always depend on what we call historical trends, disruptions such as that of the global pandemic, and other macro environmental forces are going to force us to rethink what we do within our agencies, within our respective organizations, and how from a planning perspective, nothing remains static. Okay, so I also think about what was reported about the availability of workers here on island, and how we saw that approximately over 50,000 of eligible working adults chose not to work. And so with regard to the reasons behind that, the importance or the opportunity to learn more about that, and also to find out why are folks still having difficulty filling viable job opportunities. And we see that that's across many different sectors. Okay. Next slide. The other macro environmental force really has to do with the demographic. We think about our population. We think about the change in population. There really wasn't much of a change in the population when you saw the results of the 2020 U.S. Census, compare that to the 2010 U.S. Census. So our population as of the 2020, we saw approximately 153,000 people. And I often wonder, and it prompts us to think about this, is what does the out-migration of residents look like currently? What does the out-migration of residents look like currently? We know the net migration percentages. It really is rather insignificant, 2% and so forth. But it prompts us to find out what is going on. And another factor from the 2020 U.S. Census with regard to housing. And it prompts us to reconsider what is going on with regard to available housing. We saw that there was less than 1,000 new homes added to the community, added to the market. And so what are the implications? Who are those who are affording the homes? A presentation by, how many of you know Siska Hutopia? Siska often shares her reports about the state of real estate on island, and as an expert providing data, providing her reports. In a 2021 report she shared that the median price for a single-family home was roughly about $380,000. Okay, maybe over 10 years ago, maybe over 15 years ago, a $380,000 home was an executive home. Right now, that is the median price for an affordable home. And affordable is all relative, because affordable to a family making no more than $45,000 a year, I mean, that may be cost prohibitive. So it really is all about context. And we won't have that context unless we truly arrive at more current data that is going to help us understand more or better about the state or the condition of our demographic, our population, and something that we take for granted. Sometimes I wonder, and I'll put my Yoji hat back on, I wonder about graduating students and what can they look forward to. Granted, there's a pay increase for the Guam Department of Education teachers, principals, assistant principals. What about those sectors where, gee whiz, I just can't afford to live at less than $20,000 a year on island, unless I live with my mom, my dad, my brothers and sisters with their children. And so you have multi-family members in single homes, and some of which do not have transportation. And so you have to think about, in this whole conversation regarding equity and inclusion, okay, and what is equitable, we see a widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. And so as we think about planning into the future, and we'll hear later on, there's going to be a panel with regard to affordable housing. Looking forward to the conversations there. But and of course, a recent study with regard to affordable housing on Guam, and the Guam Symposium on housing that took place a few months ago. But it's still a very real problem, and I worry about the number of young families wanting to enlist in the military, wanting to leave island to join up with family members just to get a job that pays $2 more per hour, okay, or $5 more per hour. but certainly they see that as an opportunity to advance their families in terms of social mobility. So just something to put out there. We know that with the Guam 2050 Sustainability Plan for Success, we're looking forward to the potential impacts, getting a better sense of the demographics, the data, and certainly having a more current perspective on the current environment in which we live in. Thank you. Next slide. Okay. So, with any new type of innovation, you know, we think about technology and how technology is designed to make our lives better. Okay, technology is designed to make things more efficient. Technology is designed to close some of those equity gaps. But access to that, maybe we all have free range access to technology, but if there's funding required to access the technology, or if you need specific type of expertise, capacity expertise, in order to implement the technology, as I learned in some agencies where you do have, yeah, we have this new system, but no one knows how to figure it out, and we just don't have enough money to pay a consultant to get it implemented, right? And so there's an opportunity where you have agencies that are more advanced, you know, that have access to not only the technology and not only the funding, but also the capacity, the expertise to get that technology moving, and the opportunity to leverage that and to share so that more comprehensively other agencies benefit, because at the end of the day, it really is all about advancing our island in the capacity that we think of as part of the vision, especially as as the conversations continue to unfold over the next couple of days. And so we think about other jurisdictions and the type of technology in place, tools in which any member of the public, any other organizations have free access to, whether it be digital dashboards, digital zoning maps, for example, having an opportunity at the front end to see what is already allowable before we waste all our time. Sitting in my capacity as a member of the Guam Land Use Commission, and I don't speak for the commission itself, but I think from the standpoint of a strategist, and I think, oh my word, if we are able to address this with solid approved plans at the front end, where there's that layer of transparency, where we don't have to wait until the tail end to learn that, oh my word, these are areas of concern that could have been mitigated at the front end. So in my capacity as chair of the Guam Land Use Commission, I am bound by, you know, our roles and responsibilities, and certainly there's a whole process that comes ahead of what is there. Oh my. Okay. You okay? Yeah. Okay. You're good? Okay. Okay. A whole process that comes in advance and midway. There's that whole critical path. There's that whole critical path of vetting. There's that whole critical path in making sure that community input is gathered. And so we have to think that it is during those stages that all of that gets vetted through. So by the time it comes at the very tail end, and of course it's hard for me because I'm, you know, those of you who know me, you know, I'm a lot more animated than I am at these Guam Land Use Commission meetings, trust me. But it doesn't negate the importance of being able to share some of these perspectives, and certainly the opportunity to be able to participate in dialogue. Okay, next slide. So again, with our macro environmental forces, you think about issues, challenges, and opportunities, questions that are thrown out. We heard a lot about the natural and physical environment from the experts. I don't profess to be the expert, but a lot of conversations surrounding sustainability and balancing sustainability, the economy, culture, infrastructure, okay? The need to factor in matters with regard to the environment, conservation, preservation, other factors that perhaps are not within radar with regard to cultural resources, historic views, historic assets, all of these that are somehow addressed in a case that I will be sharing relatively soon. The United Nations, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and a lot of plans and conversations surround that. The adoption of the 17 development goals that we've seen with the this administration's Guam Green Growth Initiative, and the many different committees or task force associated. I know I'm associated with one with regard to workforce and education, but having that comprehensive level of participation in something that is supposed to be a really good thing with regard to benefiting the welfare, the safety, and the advancement of our community. So we learned that the Guam 2050 Sustainability Plan, there is a framework, the framework that addresses, the environment, culture, right? Infrastructure, the economy. And so we're very excited about that particular planning process taking place, and I'm sure you're all going to be participants in that regard, in addition to other stakeholders. Let's see. Next slide. Okay. So political and legal land use, we think about the existing statutes, the existing regulations. We've heard, there's a plan, but it doesn't have teeth, and it should have teeth, and that's what our decisions are based on. And those of you who've learned about plans, not just planning, but plans, is that plans are supposed to be a living document. And what that means is that as new variables, new variants enter that particular sphere of your organization, that prompts some reconsideration of what's already reflected in your plans. Okay? When you have a plan that's dated 1978, okay, or a plan that's dated something like 2009, and you wonder why people don't take it seriously, well, maybe it needs to be reinforced if it's still something that's very, very relevant, if it's still very, very relevant, that it really needs to be enforced, that this is something that certainly is the basis or the guide for why we make decisions, okay? And so these master plans, these comprehensive plans that are required across by each major agency for the purpose of protection, for the purpose of benefiting the community, for the purpose of ensuring that we preserve things that are good for our society. These are put in place for a reason. But at the same time, the harmonizing of these plans, having that conversation so that there are no inconsistencies, especially, I think about the application or agency review committee process of key agencies like the Guam Department of Agriculture, the Guam Environmental Protection Agency, DPW, the Guam Fire Department, for example. And each key representative of each of these key agencies must provide their position statement with regard to an application. And so if there are inconsistencies in what they're reporting based on their very careful and intentional review of the efficacy of the proposed development or request, okay, then it becomes problematic. And so you kind of weigh out, you're like, well, which way ought we to go? And so when I say strategic perspective, I mean it from the context of there needs to be harmonizing in terms of these conversations and in terms of making sure that there is a common understanding of the intent of these regulations or these statutes. And so we also think about the currency and the relevancy of what's codified. And is this something that's only for a particular fix, for this fixed period of time or for this fixed purpose? Do we think about the long range or the long-term implications of what is being introduced as a resolution for proposed legislation? The implications, does it allow for the opportunity for growth? Does it allow for the potential shifts in the population? Does it allow for new technologies? What do we have in place that provides you that necessary degree of flexibility so that we can move forward? Okay. Next slide. Social and cultural. Oh my goodness. And so a lot of going on with regard to the need for environmental stewardship and that whole renaissance of cultural awareness and the need to protect our cultural assets, our historical districts, our historical and cultural views, and how sometimes that gets us into hot water because that particular aspect within the planning may not be there, because this is something that has arrived more recently over the past 5 to 10 years, and yet was not captured in 1978 or was not captured in 2009. But it's something that is very, very relevant with regard to social and cultural force, right? And we think about the inequity from a social standpoint, more homelessness, what is going on, affordable homes, as I covered in an earlier segment. The applications that have come through for consideration through the Guam Land Use Commission, absent a clearly updated zoning map and absent an updated comprehensive plan, you have what is called the first mover advantage in applying for something, some development, because, oh my goodness, you don't have other folks that are racing to that permitting line to pursue that particular type of development. Well, you know, it's really a barren area. There's not, you know, we don't have any homes nearby. We don't have any schools nearby. It seems like a viable project, but absent a plan, we don't know 10 years out. We don't know 15 years out or 20 years out. And so that's, you know, so almost a pragmatic consideration as we think about what has been happening. It's the first mover. Well, I'm ready to put in my application, so therefore it's going to go through that process. It's going to go through that critical path. It's going to go through those public hearings, and gee whiz, I'm there. And yet, maybe a year down the line, we've got someone who says, no, we were going to build, you know, an affordable home subdivision. Or no, we were going to build these parks, okay, these leisure spaces. No, we've got these green spaces, but we haven't factored them in. Okay, so these are just items that I just wanted to raise, and you know, just all of our consciousness. They don't include everything. They're just a lot of these thoughts that were, you know, have been going on in other people's minds as well. So I'm going to shift gears now. The next slide really has to do with, okay, I'm sure that this is an exercise that you've already gone through, and of course, with the sustainability 2050 sustainability plan, this is the exercise you're going through as well. But it has to do with what should our goals and priorities for Guam be, and for those who have access to your QR code, if you just want to enter perhaps some keywords, items that you've already been thinking about, something that's already been factored into a plan, what ought our goals and priorities be with regard to land use planning? Okay, sorry. Okay. So, well, if you've got something, we'll go ahead and flash it, and then I'll just kind of move on. Yes? Okay, affordable housing here seems to be at center stage, and all these other responses, I think we can share them with the group. I know I've been signaled I've run out of time, but gosh, this has been fun. I just want the other item that came up was key assumptions, but we'll leave that for another exercise. The other slide that I wanted to showcase, if Shane and Luigi are ready, just to close us out so I'm respectful of the time. It really has to do with what has already been shown by the RIM architect team, AIA, Marianas, and a wonderful example of a promising practice that could possibly be replicated across all of our villages, given the same level of support by our partners to help arrive at some level of a revitalization plan. So this is the Humatek revitalization plan. I just read it really quickly, how they've been able to engage in the assessment of their environment, history, and demography, the trends, the common priorities of communities and goals. And with the emphasis here is conceptualize solutions to achieve goals based on engaging the community and making sure the community were given the feedback for review and revision with regard to how their input was incorporated into some of these conceptualized solutions, and then incorporating their feedback into the designs so that the community takes ownership. And with ownership comes respect for what is intended for that respective space. And so the last note is just to consider a plan as living and not static, but living and adaptable, because things change over time. And so I want to thank everybody, Sindekalis and Suzmasi, for this opportunity, to our partners with BSP and others, the opportunity to share. Suzmasi.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anita Borja Enriquez. That was a great presentation, and it got us warmed up. Are you falling asleep yet? We had your lunch. We don't want you to fall asleep. Okay, everybody stand up. Just real quick. Stand up. Come on. Everybody up. Twist, left, right. You know, you always do this in conferences, right? Shake out your hands. Shake out your hands. Don't fall asleep. We don't want you to fall asleep. Okay. Have a seat. All right, so we're ready for our next session, and it is going to be on watershed and development impacts. So I would like to call to the stage all of the presenters, please, and I will start giving a little bit of a background. So our facilitator for this is going to be Jesse Cruz, a marine biologist who obtained his undergrad degree from University of Tampa. He has worked with the Guam Environmental Protection Agency for over 20 years and is the division administrator for the Guam Environmental Monitoring and Analytical Services Division, which monitors and assesses Guam's freshwater and marine environments. Jesse, welcome to the stage. Also joining him, we are going to have Vanji Lujan, a senior regulatory analyst with the Guam Waterworks Authority, and a standard staple for all of these events. Yeah, no, it's wonderful. Vanji is a senior analyst with GWA. Her primary responsibility is to ensure compliance environmental regulations related to safe and clean water, and she's held so many leadership positions. So good to have her back on the stage. Also joining us is Captain Brian Bearden, a commissioned officer with the U.S. Public Health Service, who has been detailed to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. He is currently assigned to Guam EPA as Chief Engineer, where he oversees all the activities of Guam's EPA Water Division, including permitting for Department of Defense construction projects. We also welcome to the stage Dr. Austin Shelton. Dr. Austin Shelton, another familiar face here, a marine and environmental scientist serving as an associate professor and the director of the University of Guam Center for Island Sustainability and Sea Grant. And Matt Geiger, Royal Investments Oceania, Guam Blue Ocean. He is an advisor, a big thinker with stakeholder-to-stakeholder collaboration for win-win interactions in commercial developments and partnerships. So at this point, I will turn over the microphone to our facilitator, Jesse Cruz.
Well, buenas and half a day. Guahusi Jesse Cruz, and I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. I am the facilitator for today's session on watersheds and development impacts. So this is our first poll question. Good information and see who's in our audience today. So please take out your phones and let's see who is here today. If your category is not on there, you can type one in. I think that's available for us on this. So you have categories. We're just looking at property owners, realtors, developers, contractors, engineers, government workers like me, and community members or other. Imagine that. At a planner symposium, there's planners. So I want to thank everybody for coming today. And to start us off, I would like to introduce you to our panel. And we'll have our panel introduce themselves, actually. So we'll start with, at the end, with Ms. Vangeluhan.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Vangeluhan, and I'm with the Guam Waterworks Authority, and I'm the Senior Regulatory Analyst. But I'm also the Climate Change Chairperson for the Climate Change Commission on Guam, as well as many other things that I have, because my children are older and I can now do these kinds of stuff.
Oh, and you're supposed to do one fun fact about yourself.
A fun fact about me is this morning I was going to wear a skirt, but then I realized that we might be sitting down, and you know, when you're women, we pay attention to this thing that people can see your legs and all, whatever. So clothes matter, and for me, lipstick matters. I think better with lipstick.
Half a day, everybody. I was not planning to wear a skirt today. I'm Austin Shelton, a marine and environmental scientist. As Ms. Ginger mentioned, I'm also the director of the University of Guam Center for Island Sustainability and Sea Grant programs. One of the initiatives that we run there is called the Guam Restoration of Watersheds, or GROW initiative for short. And so we're doing lots of watershed work that we're really excited about, and happy to talk more about it during this panel. Fun fact, I was trying to think, what is something that people don't really know about me? I don't know if you guys have your own role during your family parties, but not many people know that I'm the expert meat carver. Like the steamboat and the pig, the turkey, I got to do all that. And I've got better skills than Martha Stewart and those Food Network people. It comes out pretty nice at the end.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brian Bearden, introduced earlier, Chief Engineer at Guam EPA. Fun fact, I was trying to think of one. 27 years ago, when I first moved to this area, to Saipan, my girlfriend at the time said, "Hey, I want to move to Saipan. I got a job as a teacher." And I said, "What is Saipan? Can I see what it looks like?" And she showed me a picture of Managaha Island, and it literally looks like Gilligan's Island. I was like, "Oh, Gilligan's Island, I guess I could live there." So I came out here thinking that I was going to be living on Managaha Island, about a quarter mile across, and was pleasantly surprised to find that it was a little bit bigger.
Hello, my name is Kristen Finney. I might be listed in the program as a representative of the Attorney General's office. That's me. I'm an assistant attorney general. I'm assigned to Guam EPA. Fun fact about me, it's not a very useful skill, but I can solve a Rubik's Cube.
Good, thank you. So now that we know about our panel and we know who's in the audience. We'd like to give you guys a little quiz, a little test to see what your knowledge is of watershed. Oh, I'm sorry. We missed Mr. Matt Geiger. I forgot who's joining us virtually. Sorry, sir.
That's okay. Can you hear me okay? Can you guys hear me? Hello. Can you guys hear me? Hello.
Yes, sir, we can hear you. Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Oh, thanks for that. Royal Sustainable Investment. I've been living on Guam now for 3 years. Diversified companies. We represent 1,100 acres of resort type land for sacred landowners. And we've been taking a sustainable approach that on expectations also with visitors coming in on what to expect when investing in Guam, conservation, and being a good steward. Me, so my daughter, Monica Geiger, is track commissioner ever appointed, and also the young style. I mean, I've been in the so watershed issues and events as a fishing community. So I have a stake with those, and I'm really interested. I want to thank everybody for letting me come.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, sir. So now you know the panel, and now I know who's here, and we're going to, like I said earlier, we're going to test your knowledge. So the next poll question, so everyone get ready for that, is what's the first word or image you think of when you hear the word watershed? You type in any word. This is into your phone. The panel want to participate too?
I think of, the first word I think of, or it's not really, it's a phrase, is cumulative effect.
Okay.
Right? Bridge to read.
Okay. Go ahead and close it, please. Ooh, watersheds is the first thing you think of as water. That's good, because, yeah, this is what it's all about. Water source, drainage, aquifer. Those are the main ones. Land can't to develop. Mountaintop, rain catchment. Anything else? Tipping point. That's an interesting one. I haven't heard of that. But the official definition for a watershed is a land area that drains water with a land area that drains all the water within it to a common destination, such as a stream, river, or in our case, the ocean. But in our case, there's more to the definition. When rain falls on the ground, it can soak into the ground and infiltrate. The groundwater will then can go deeper and to form and collect underground reservoirs called aquifers, which will then discharge in the ocean. So for Guam, next slide, please. Sorry. So that was the definition for watershed. And these are some images of what watersheds could be on Guam. Next one, please. But for Guam, both portions of the definitions really do apply. So you see, the northern half of the Guam is one big, large watershed, which normally most people don't think of, but it's the second part of the definition. And then on the southern half of Guam is made up of 15 watersheds, with the largest being Talifofo, and then the smallest one being Toguan. Next slide, please. Again. So for now, for our panel, the first question for them is, which watershed do you live in, and which one are you most concerned about? So we'll start at the end, please.
I live in the Pago Bay watershed, and erosion's a big issue there. During rainy season, we see the impacts of poor land use activities.
I'll go with the second part on this, Jesse. Which one are you most concerned about? I've been working in the Ugam and the Humatic watersheds recently. And there's quite a few erosion concerns there on the land that affect the downstream coral reefs.
Yeah, I live here in the Tumon area. We get our water from the northern part of Guam, and that is the area that I'm most concerned about, especially in my job at Guam EPA, because I see those results. I see the quality of the aquifer getting worse over time.
I live in Epan, and I know there's been a lot of development lately in the Epan and Talafofo areas.
So you see everyone has a wide range of where they live on island and different concerns and different watersheds and what's important to them and how it goes. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. We forgot to ask I keep forgetting, Mr. Matt Geiger's online to ask him the question. Sorry, sir.
Forget about I live in the Neal district, the Danish Basin district. Concerned just happened our Neal solar farm, the damage that created, and trying not to have people replicate that in the future.
Okay, thank you, sir. We are having some technical issues. I didn't catch everything that you said.
Are you hearing better?
Is there a way to
Can
fix
you
this
hear me
audio?
better now? I live in Manila. I'm in the Manila district.
All right, well, thank you. We're having technical difficulties with Mr. Geiger.
Okay.
So next slide, please. So for the panel, now that we know where everyone lives, who's here, and what everyone thinks of the watershed, what is one of the most harmful practices, land use practices, or unpermitted activity you think is occurring in any watershed, and what's being impacted? We'll start at this end with Kristen. Okay, we'll start with Brian then.
Well, sure. One of the topics that I've been working on quite a bit recently is the topic of septic systems over the northern aquifer, and especially the density of development that's happening there right now. If you go back to the 1982 Northern Guam Lens study, which is, John Mink, everybody knows about John Mink if they have read about the aquifer. He had recommended a density of 1 home per every 3 acres to keep the northern Lens aquifers safe. At some point in time, that became 1 home per half acre, which is written into all of Guam's laws and regulations. But what we see right now is about more than half of the septic systems that we permit within the groundwater protection zones are on quarter-acre lots. So we're basically doubling the density even from that half-acre density, and very concerned about the impact that has on our aquifer. And we're seeing that in terms of rising nitrates across the aquifer. Weary's done the studies. 58% of the wells that Weary looked at were increasing over time in terms of nitrate. Nitrate's harmful on its own. It causes an issue, especially with infants, where they could potentially pass away from what's called blue baby syndrome, but it's also just an indicator of the amount of wastewater that's getting into our aquifer. And that's really concerning to me as both a consumer and as a regulator of drinking water.
Okay. So that's important because, again, with this planning symposium, like some other talker previous presentation was saying, haven't been an updated land use plan in a while. And so if there was a land use plan, you think that would help mitigate some of these issues?
Possibly, but I think what we're seeing is that everyone is so invested in this now. It's almost like and we've heard the word right. People have told us they have a right to develop these quarter-acre lots. So it's almost beyond the point where a plan could influence that. One of the things that we're looking at right now is technology as an alternative, is advanced on-site treatment systems as a requirement, which reduce nitrate and the strength of wastewater down to half or less than what it would with a traditional septic system. So then your 4 septic systems per acre become more or less the equivalent of 2 per acre, which is what we had originally intended, I suppose, with those half-acre requirements that were placed into law long ago.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Shelton?
I have a whole list, but I'm just going to keep one so Vanjie can answer a bunch too. I think one of the main watershed concerns in the south is arson fires, wildland arson fires that are burning hillsides, mostly by deer poachers, some fires getting out of control from backyard fires, but basically it just takes one flame to burn a whole hillside, and then that continues the cycle of fires and erosion. Our trees don't have a chance to come back up, and all of the topsoil and the nutrients wash away, creating those red top badlands that are a large source of erosion that affects everything from the top of the mountain down to the coral reefs below.
And so Christine and the Department of Agriculture's forestry plan is a good way to help prevent that, because they're going to be actually have as managed areas and more protected areas and more enforcement going along, right?
Can I say something about Christine's plan? One of the things that when the people were doing the forest legacy plan was they need the land in conservation legally to be able to do that work. And I think that that's part of our problem is what the policies and the laws are inconsistent with what we need and the work that we need to do. And sometimes I think that there's a lack of, the community doesn't really care. We only care, sometimes we want to feel good about certain things. So we expect people like Dr. Shelton and his group and Christine and Department of Ag to go out and to do that. But what would it really take for us to control erosion that really we all know the reason the corals are being smothered by sediment? We all know that certain types of sedimentation control is required. But I don't believe that we have the wherewithal to make the change. How many people in here have had to write an application review process? Plenty. But yet, and that goes to land management, but nobody takes the time. We have this beautiful document. Federal consistency is another one, but no one is enforcing it. And you just sort of, all the people in here, we know what the right thing to do is, but perhaps we're not the people that this needs to be addressed to. Maybe we need to get the people who really are in charge of this island and the policies to be in that conversation with us. 5 years ago or 6 years ago, we had something similar to this, and Dan Swavely was here, and he basically emailed me and said, very nice, but you know it's never going to happen because it's nice to have a conversation, but we're not going to do it. And that, to me, was very enlightening. So I think that what's harmful to our watershed is that it takes a lot for a community to want to make a change, and we expect a lot of the government agencies and a lot of programs like Dr. Shelton's with his change agents to make that happen for all of us. And I think we just need be more responsible and active in making that change. And how do we change our minds, right? Sorry, I took a long time.
No, that's good, because like other presenters were talking about earlier, the change has to start somewhere, right? And we need to be that moment of change. And they talked about trying to engage our youth, getting the youth involved. But that's going to take time. But for us here, like at Guam EPA or at other Government of Guam agencies, like Dr. Enrique was saying, our regulations haven't been updated in a while. We are lacking teeth and enforcement in a lot of our regulations. And so it is a work in progress that we're trying to get that stick to enforce, and if we can't get compliance through will and compliance, then we'll try and get compliance through the legal remedies or whatnot. But thank you, Vanjie. Kristen?
Well, just to, I guess, if I could follow up on what you're saying about remedies, as there's increasing development, we've had to look to new tools, like for example, that recent case where the Attorney General's office brought an action against a company that had caused harm to our natural resources. And so for the first time, we're looking at pursuing theories of public nuisance and the idea that the government holds all of the natural resources in trust for the people, and so to be able to pursue those theories. And that was kind of a new approach. It's not, you know, a change to the law that's been made yet, but it's something that's kind of another layer that we've had to look at as an additional enforcement tool.
Well, that's good. Thank you. Next slide, please. This one slide was just so for the audience could look at. The panel kind of highlighted some of them. So you see that there's sedimentation in some of our rivers, in the bays, Afina Reservoir, off-roading events, illegal farming or pesticide use, siltation, fires, things like that, and erosion of roads and passageways. So those are some of the main harmful practices and unpermitted activities that have been happening here on Guam that everyone has been trying to address. Next slide, please. Next question. How can the planning, enforcement, and public awareness help improve watershed management? You're passed. Really? Okay. Ryan, you want to start, please?
I can set up Kristen to talk about one of our enforcement cases that benefited not just a single watershed, but all of Guam. We had a violator. It was a fairly administrative violation where they had continued working for a couple years without a permit. So their permit had expired. They'd gone on for quite a while. And we brought them in for a pretty high penalty at the time. It was at our capped penalty that we had of $125,000. That cap has now been lifted, so we have a lot more teeth, I guess. But maybe I'll let Kristen talk about how we, and she was really key to this, was getting what we call a supplemental environmental project as a settlement. Kristen, you want to talk about that?
Yes, so lifting that cap, I think, for future enforcement is going to be really important because it allows Guam EPA to impose penalties that can be more in line with the amount of damage that is caused. But in this case, another tool in addition to the penalties can be that, you know, when somebody's penalized for a violation, they can come in with there's a policy that Guam EPA has that says we can consider a supplemental environmental project in addition to penalties. And so in this case, the contractor funded these certification classes at the Trades Academy. So that's how it's something that created a benefit to get more people trained so that we can hopefully avoid future violations.
Dr. Shelton, you have any comments on this?
Test. For planning, I think there's planning and there's also preparation. Just to go back to what the Forestry Division is doing at the Guam Department of Agriculture, there's a lot of fire breaks that are getting put into our southern watershed managed areas, and we're adding to that to prevent these fires from spreading so quickly. Enforcement, I think we can continue. We still are lacking conservation officers, so they definitely need more positions for having more boots on the ground to catch people that are setting fires and doing other environmental violations, to make sure that those enforced, and that in turn will feed into more public awareness for people to understand that setting fires to these hillsides are not acceptable. That it's not just that when we're thinking about the consequences of these actions, it's not just one little fire in one spot, but it's actually causing erosion, it's preventing more trees from coming back, and it's smothering and killing coral reefs, which actually have tremendous economic value to our island. So we need to do a better job at telling that story about those connections. And just another point from the last question in our panel about Vanji was talking about capacity building, and I think that that's something that we've been working really hard with at the University of Guam. Today, we've graduated in partnership with the Governor's Office, the second cohort of the Guam Green Growth Conservation Corps. They just finished planting 3,000 trees over the last 5 months. They've pruned lots of trees. They've got lots of training in all different types of agriculture and aquaculture topics, but trees has been a very important part of that for watershed management. I see our Associate Director from our Center for Island Sustainability, Elsa, over there. She's part of our project that we have over 100 new positions for Pacific Islander students over the next few years to get training in marine, environmental, and sustainability sciences. They're learning how to plant trees, to study biodiversity, to manage forests. So I think we're building up this capacity, and even with our Soil and Water Conservation District friends over here, supporting innovations like the drones that are helping to drop seeds in the watersheds. I think there's a lot of hope that intersects these areas of planning, enforcement, and public awareness to get better watershed management done.
Okay. So yeah, I guess that's why I was a little remiss in the beginning. Why watersheds within Planner Symposium? Because we're all kind of alluding to the little, the connectivity between what happens in one little part of the island or one little project does have a whole larger synergy effect with everything else that's going. So if you saw on the map of watersheds, you know, we got 15 watersheds. So one little thing does have a large impact from, again, with the watersheds, from the top of the mountain all the way down to the ocean and into the reefs. So thank you for that.
So I just wanted to add that I think that one of the approaches that we need to explore more as we review development is really we all talk about taking the watershed approach, and I would like to see that as the ways that the Guam Land Use Commission reviews applications. We do this thing under federal consistency called cumulative effect, and we don't necessarily do that when we're building a house or anything, that the development doesn't necessarily have to evaluate what that effect is within your watershed or what that means to build this house in this particular area to coral reefs or anything like that. So I'd like to see something like that.
Okay, thank you. We're going to try cut to Mr. Geiger again. Mr. Geiger, if you could just try turning your camera off this time and see if we can respond to the question, please. Oh, sorry, Mr. Geiger. We're really having connectivity problems with you today, so I apologize for that. So sorry you couldn't join us today. We'll keep trying. Next slide, please. The next question for the panel is, can a watershed remain healthy with added land development? So that's kind of what this Planner Symposium is all about, right? Can we satisfy all parts of like the environment, the economy, you know, our cultural, our economics, and everything like that? So let's see, who didn't we pick on first last time? We'll start with Kristen. You're in the end. Oh, I know, but you're okay.
Yeah, I think, you know, as an engineer, I'm fairly optimistic. I always believe that development can occur without significant environmental impacts if it's done right, right? So if we have plans and we follow them, if we have regulations and we follow them, then yes, I think added land development can be done without significant impacts to the watershed. But what we've seen, and I'll go back to, again, my priority watershed of northern Guam with this individual home development. So you've got your plan, but then you pass into law with I'm sure, excellent intentions, an exception to that for, you know, individuals who want to pass land down to their family members. But when that amounts to more than half of the development that's occurring, then you don't really have a plan anymore. You've blown that plan out the window, and now you're back to what you had before, and you're having those impacts. So plan isn't any good if you don't follow it. Regulations aren't any good if they aren't made to match that plan, right? And that's another question I have about plans. We often have these meetings and we hear, well, you guys should use the non-point source management plan in your role of trying to develop. It's like, well, how do we use that? Was it ever implemented into regulation? No. These plans have to go into something that's codified that we can then use as the enforcers. Otherwise, they really aren't that good to us.
So do you think that there's going to be a cap, a limit on development in watersheds? There's a balance that we need to have, like with green spaces and single home family developments and things like that?
We've been talking about this a lot recently with Senator Perez and some of the stakeholders, and there's a number of things, right? So if you want to tackle this problem specifically, right, there's connecting existing homes to sewer, very expensive, right? Who pays for that? Does the Guam public pay for that in terms of taxes? Do the GWA ratepayers pay for that in terms of increased rates, or do the people that moved into these homes pay for that? So that's one option, pluses and minuses. Another option is, like you said, some sort of cap or density restrictions, going back to 1 home per acre, 1 home per 3 acres to make up for the damage we've already done. That's already a no-go from what we hear with the stakeholders. So we're down to kind of the final and probably the least or the most risky solution, which is the technological solution, which is what we're looking at, these nitrogen-reducing septic systems. So you can stay at 4 homes per acre, 1 home per quarter acre, if you want to say it that way, and be roughly equivalent to the 2 homes per acre, which was your original target. But you're still, and you do that, and you're covering future development to some extent, but you're not covering past development that's already occurred. So it's those cumulative impacts that Vanjie talks about, and I'm firmly behind. That's what we're seeing, and we'll talk about that in the next panel too with flooding. Same issue. These little things, they add up over time. So those are the things we're looking at, and they all have pluses and minuses, and there's got to be some combination of all three.
Okay.
I think that you can have a healthy watershed with additional land development if, as we're all talking about, and I know BSP is trying to do, if we actually follow the sustainability plans. And in the meeting that Austin and I attended, he was just talking about some of these things. Sometimes I think we shoot ourselves in the foot saying we're not going to do something because you think it's going to be very costly or difficult to do. But right now, the way that we manage erosion, especially in large swaths of land, is really tree planting. And because we lost our birds, Dr. Shelton is doing the dropping of the drones for seeds. And those are not very expensive, well, relatively compared to infrastructure, right? And I think that when we start looking at the sustainability plan, maybe we need to give options to people that are developing, that here's what you need to do, but you need to do something. We've gone so long in this community where people can develop their property and not have to do anything for the rest of the community. I think Brian had said it, or maybe it was Kristen, where they believe that it's my property and I should be given the authority to do whatever I want. But that's not necessarily. We live in a community. We have to do something for the community. And I think that if something like that was incorporated into land development, where you're doing something for the benefit of the environment or the community to address watershed problems, I think it would be better.
Yeah. Which is good, because you came in a little bit late. I'll rat you out. But the Architect Association, they talked about that this morning, and so their whole concept again was trying to build that community involvement and the whole. I'm going to misspeak here, but they did it very well, and everybody was here that did. But you're bringing this kind of again back full circle as to the original thought of why watersheds are important and why is it in a planning symposium, because everything that happens has a synergistic effect all the way down the line, and everything needs to be thought about and regulated in a whole, not just an individual lot size product. Thank you.
And I think in addition to the planning, to the limits, to the enforcement discussion that we're having right now, I think also just sustainable development practices will be very important. So one of the other environmental stressors in a watershed is stormwater volume and stormwater velocity. And so if you're putting new development in, like a brand new huge parking lot, what you're doing is somewhere you're creating a new impermeable surface and you're causing more stormwater volume and velocity somewhere else. So if you were to shift your thinking, or maybe it's a policy in the plan that says you must make that permeable concrete, or instead of creating these curbs where you're going to, the architecture, my architects are nodding their heads. I wonder if you talked about this morning, sorry.
Yes, they were.
Yeah, so right, you have to make those curbs for your trees that, make it go downhill. So you're watering your plants instead of building a parking lot, then building a curb, then building in your irrigation and wasting more water. There's all of these backward steps where you can take a look at, like the Micronesia Mall parking lot, for example, where there's permeable parking spots. Those are development practices that could reduce the impact and help keep a watershed healthy.
Yes, so again, that was a good presentation by the architects this morning, and so you guys are really reinforcing what they were pushing and what the overall plan or the vision moving forward is that I hope we do move forward with. Redundant. Kristen, you have anything to add? No? It's okay. Is Mr. Geiger, no? Okay, Mr. Geiger is out, so we'll try and move on to the next one. Next slide, please. So now this is a basic storytelling time where, instead of me asking questions of the panel or whatever, we're going to try and just have them talk about a case study that they have or they can thought about that relates to this. So the question is, creating a meaningful experience makes a difference in learning and influences changes to a person's behavior. Provide an example of a meaningful experience that you were involved with and that led to changes in attitude, behavior, or policy. And we'll start with, at the end.
You want with me?
Or either you or Dr. Shelton.
Oh, Dr. Shelton.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. I guess I'll share an experience that worked for our group. One of the first watershed projects that I was working on. There's a lot of our original partners in the room, but this was the Humatic project that I was working on as a graduate student. I think this was back in 2010, 2011 or so, that we had, I was a coral reef student. And I was given an opportunity as a grad student at the University of Hawaii to come back home, and my professor was Bob Richmond, who used to be the director of the Marine Lab, and he said, "Austin, why don't you go back home and do a watershed project to help the coral reefs?" And so my only experience with trees back then was planting banana trees in my backyard. Whenever I'd get in trouble at school, my dad would say, "Go take care of the banana trees, pull the weeds," or something like that. And so that's all I knew. But then I see Margaret from Guam EPA here. She was always sending me resources, and Bart Lawrence about how the trees work on Guam. Like, we need to plant acacia trees because of this reason, the nitrogen-fixing bacteria. And then the forestry division was kind enough to donate trees, and we got this community group together in Humatic, together with the Humatic Community Foundation, Joe Kanata, and the mayor there. And groups at UOG, different students. We were able to mobilize volunteers, get trees in the ground. Christine, who's now the chief at forestry, was at Bureau Statistics and Plans. She helped go out when I had to go back to school. She would check on the trees, make sure nobody burned them, and we'd check their height. And just after a couple of years putting in 200 trees, putting in an innovative device called a sediment sock, 200 feet of sediment filter socks, we were able to determine that just that small amount of community effort was able to prevent 110 tons of sediment from flowing down into Fua Bay, which we really got a lot of support of, because that is the bay where, according to our Chamorro traditions, that is where civilization began. And so we have lots of the Lukau Fuas every year that people do the pilgrimage down there. So this was a really great place to start and demonstrate that practices that the community can get involved and plant trees and install other sediment devices does work. We were able to put a number for the very first time that we can calculate the tons and estimate what it would take to also restore full watersheds. Like, how could we scale that up? So it's thousands and thousands of trees, but we are finding the innovative ways to add to that toolbox with the drones and other methods now.
That's good. And just a quick plug for the Guam Museum. If you guys haven't been down there, they have a really great, I guess it's their standing display on the creation myth and the Fuha. It's really good. If you guys should go and do it. Guam Museum. But I digress, sorry. So we've heard about the Humanic Foundation, and the thing, and Mr. Joe Kanata is great, and he is really an inspiration to me. And so the main thing that I've been getting out of this with your story and the whole story of the Humanic Foundation is that it can be done. We just got to get the right players together, and we really need a champion. We need somebody, it was you initially, and then, Mr. Kanata, and then the rest of the village. And so we just need to find a way to replicate that in other villages, and we need to find the next champion for the next village to move it forward, because you guys are a perfect example that it can be done. It's not all the normal excuses of people are indifferent, it costs too much, all of these things, but it works. So thank you and congratulations.
Jesse and I, before we got up here, we were saying, man, Jesse, we've been doing this for a very long time. We started when watersheds weren't even a term people understood. And Austin was a student, so we've been doing this a long time. But one of the things that I had been able to do is I was a part of a group called Save Southern Guam, and I don't know if Lassie is still here. But what that experience taught us is that the community can make a difference and change the way that development occurs within a community. It didn't matter to, I'm sorry to say, the Guam Land Use Commission that it's a special watershed, that there's special types of natural resources within the watershed of Pago Bay, but they just really believe that having this humongous development right there at the bay was going to be important for the economy. And it was a few people that got together, and we did have a champion. Linda Tetro was our champion, as well as Lasia, that said, let's not do this. And we had the group of Marine Mania students who have, as we all know, have been an intricate part of community and watershed development here on Guam, that they said, we're not going to do this, and we're going to go to the Land Use Commission and say, cannot happen in our community. So my experience with that was that communities can make a difference. The people that actually live in the community of Pago Bay didn't want this development. As a result, we have now called the Hybrid Land Use Commission, where now mayors, and our other champion was Mayor Jesse over there from the village of Chalampago. And it was something, so I think that one of the lessons that I learned is it only takes a small group of people. You have to have somebody that's a champion, but you can make a difference, including in policy. And today we can still look at off the bay, and there's no development there.
Well, yep, thank you for that. So again, Jess, I guess I really want to emphasize this, is that it can be done. And, we just need to inspire the next generation. We need those champions out there, and we need to find a way to do it. Like everyone else has been saying, plans. I mean, we're at Guam EPA. We got a lot of plans, right? We got a lot of plans for everything. We review plans every day. But, we always come up against that hurdle, like Brian was saying, is that we only can do as much as our regulations say. Everyone believes Guam EPA is I like to use this, we're the knight in white and shining armor. We're going to go and slay every environmental dragon because we're Guam EPA. But we only can slay it up to a certain point because our regulations say that's all we can do. And we're a regulatory agency, and so it's more difficult. So sorry, Brian.
Yeah, I have a great story that blends in a lot of the people in this room for a more recent event, and that was the Inarahan Pool construction project that's pretty much finished right now, I believe, right? So back in late March, I was in Hawaii on the BIL meeting, and I was with Vince Areola from DPW, and we got contacted during that trip that contractor was not installing any erosion control at all. They were making a mess. Vince happened to be there. He's like, go get them. So we sent our enforcement staff out there. And our first goals with enforcement is always not to go out there and get money. I mean, we want compliance. So we try to work with the contractor first. for a lot of reasons. One being that trying to get money is a huge amount of work for us. So our staff went there, told the contractor to install their BMPs. They didn't do it right, so we went back out and said, all right, here's the next step. We're going to require you to go to the erosion control training at the Guam Trades Academy, which was what Kristen had helped us set up with the AG's office through another violator. And by the way, the funding that they provided for that's enough for at least 350 contractors to go through that training. So that contractor went there and they took 5 days course. I think they stopped work during that time. They came back and they were telling us, like, man, I had no idea. This is such fascinating stuff. I had no idea we're supposed to be doing all this. And they went and they then installed their BMPs almost immaculately. Our crew, our inspectors were just amazed at how well they did their job. And it changed those contractors. It changed the way that they think to get that training. And that training was produced and created by BSP, the Coastal Zone Program, and through NOAA funding years ago based on work that I was working on back 20 years ago in Saipan. So it all comes together, and I think that's a great lesson for all of us, that there's a lot of good pieces that we all have, and when we put them together, it can really be effective. And this is, I think it was a great case of that.
Yep, the Contractors Trades Academy, is that where the Contractor Association?
Yeah, the Guam Trades Academy,
Guam
which
Trades
is tied
Academy.
up with the Guam Contractors Association.
Okay.
Somehow.
Yep. So if you guys know any contractors, you can send them to Trades Academy, and they can get refreshed on their BMPs and the installation and which ones are appropriate. So next, Kristen.
I don't think I have a lot to add to that, but I guess I just want to say, I know that the agency, like at Guam EPA, there's a lot of knowledgeable people that are, willing to enforce, to help, and I think it's a good thing that we have had that support to be able to go to, like Brian says, our first goal is compliance. When you don't have the compliance, we have to be willing to take that next step and to actually enforce the regulations that we have.
Yeah, okay. So for me, one of the ones was, we're down here in Tumon. So you remember the flooding having occurred, and then there was a big push for an outfall that go across Tumon Bay. And so, not to make story short, that there was some good people, good public involvement, and that they came and said, no, that's not right. That's not what we want. And they used some of the Guam water quality data that we take for our beach water quality samples and everything. Let's say it's like, the increased water, increased pollution, increased runoff is not going to be good for the bay and the swimmers in the bay. And so even though that was the least, I can't remember the complete technical term, the cheapest option for it, and that's why they were going to move forward, but it ended up not being the appropriate one for the area. And so, again, it's community involvement, using the data, pooling resources, leveraging ideas and people that you wouldn't think aren't your coworkers or would be in the same mindset or car with you to go to a destination and actually get a project done or not done because it wasn't the right thing to do, even though it was the cheapest and it was going to help save Tumon from flooding. Next slide, please. Last one. So we're running out of time, so this will be a quick, actually we kind of hit this one with Brian and Kristen's question about enforcement and my thing. So next slide, please. So alternative land use options and practices. So as a quick poll question again for you. So we kind of went through some of the issues that we have on island, some of the current land uses and whatnot. So I would like to ask the audience, can you guys just quick some alternate land use practices that you know of or are aware of? Give it a couple more seconds. Can you just go to the next slide while we're doing this, please? Or go ahead and close it if we're... So in anticipation of this little slide, I went through it because I'm a marine biologist. I collect water, my head's in the water, or I'm in the jungle. And so I had to look up some stuff. So ones that kind of caught me, and we kind of alluded to, were like rain gardens, using drought-tolerant landscaping, composting. We mentioned permeable pavements, and then crop rotation, things like that. So I was trying to pick ones from different aspects of the different type of land uses. So can we go to the results, please? Yeah, agroforestry, native tree planting, composting, rain gardens. See, I wasn't too far off. Green infrastructure, permeable pavements, minimum concrete surfaces. Yeah, so everyone is thinking along the same lines. So we all know what to do. We all know what's right. It's just how do we get it done? How do we move forward? And how do we make it the norm? Next slide, please. This is just real quick, the panel. Was there anything that was not mentioned in that list that you guys wanted to mention that we didn't think of? Nope. I guess we're at next slide, please. Because you guys are so smart. You stumped my panel. Oh, that kind of got washed out. But this was audience questions. So it's a real quick Q&A. If you guys have any questions for the panel before we close out. No questions for the panel? Oh, here. I'm sorry. Mayor. I think they're recording it, sir, so you have to use. Thank you for your patience.
Well, I actually have two questions. The first one is for Dr. Shelton, and then the second one is just a general question that anybody can answer. So the first question is, you know, Dr. Shelton, you had mentioned your role that you played with the Humatic watershed. The question is, did you find it easier to implement a watershed program in Humatic because the area was predominantly government-owned land versus privately owned lands? And if that's the case, that the lands were predominantly government-owned, how do you see implementing a watershed program and the other watersheds where they're predominantly privately owned lands? And then the second question is, you guys had mentioned the required training with regard to, sediment control that a contractor had to attend, et cetera, et cetera. Would you propose that when contractors seek out their license and obtain for the first time a license, that actually be a required program in the licensing scheme of things?
Mr. Mayor, I'll take your first question. Thank you for that. I think that watershed restoration has to occur both on public and private lands. And so in some sense, you can, if you find the right agency that's in charge of the property, get into memorandums of understanding and get a quick project going. But also it could be really effective, such as our Ugam watershed work right now. A lot of that is privately owned, and you have to go through large swaths of private-owned areas to even get to the government-owned areas. And our partnership with the Guam Southern Soil and Water Conservation District was actually really essential in getting that partnership or getting that permission to go into that property. They had to go house by house to find the property owners, and finally found one big property owner that we were able to get an agreement with, and so we were able to adopt a lot of that private area, get it written into an MOU so that it would satisfy our grant requirements, because you can't just plant a tree and maybe next year they're going to cut it down. They have to agree to keep our trees and our sediment devices in for long periods of time. And so we were able to work, I guess, on both ways, public land and private land in our watershed restoration experience. And there's pros and cons and different barriers that we need to get through on both sides there.
I'll take your second question, Mayor. So the way we're trying to enforce this training requirement is written into the 2006 Guam CNMI Stormwater Management Manual, which is adopted by executive order only. So it's the requirement in the manual is that every single construction site has to have somebody on that site who's in charge of the site, the superintendent, the day manager, whatever it happens to be, who has proof that they've been trained. And it's tough to enforce that because it's an executive order. There's no enforcement with an executive order. So the only way that we can enforce that now will be as a permit requirement. So what we've been putting into every single permit since the beginning of this year, and we're up to a couple hundred building permits already, and maybe 30 or 40 grading permits, is that the contractors have 6 months to get that certification, and that by the end of this year we will start enforcing that through a application requirement. So they will not be able to get their permit until they provide us proof that their person on the site has that training. We've asked the Guam Contractors Association to help us get the word out. I'm not sure if they have. But we're 4 months away from the end of the year or less, and that's what we intend to do. As far as requiring as a contractor's license requirement, I don't know. I think what we'd like to see is just that somebody on the site have it. We don't want to stop at just the owner of the company. We want to make sure that the people on the site who are actually performing the work are the ones that are certified, and that's why we've chosen to go this route. And of course, just to follow up on to chastise ourselves as an agency, we need to update our regulations to make this part of our regulations and not just the executive order.
No, any other questions? One last question, please.
If we can make it real short.
Real short, yes.
Here, you get my microphone. I'll give you the microphone, but only if it's a short question.
There are a lot of responsible architects and engineers. We talk about designing good plans and making spaces work. But we also have some that are probably not so good at it. What is the government doing to make sure these other ones are doing what they need to do?
Yeah, that's not a short question. Maybe we can cover this a little bit under the next panel with flooding, but the short version of that is, we've been looking very carefully. I've kept statistics at Guam EPA with permitting, and more than half of the building permits that come through our office are stamped by just 4 or 5 architects and engineers on the island. And there's just no way that those engineers are able to do, in one case, over 100 permits a year. There's no way they're able to provide the level of attention and detail to their plans. The typical engineering firm that we see on Guam does anywhere from 5 to 12 a year. I think the busiest one we've seen is maybe 20, and we've got some of these guys doing 50, 70, 100 a year. So there's something wrong there, and that's where we see a lot of the problem. And we do not see good plans, and we go back and forth, and it drags the whole permitting process down.
Thank you for that question. So we're closing out the session, and I would thank you as our panel members for their participation and their knowledge and everything. So please give them a round of applause. Thank you.
And thank you very much to our facilitator, Jesse Cruz. We appreciate that. So now we are going to have a plenary session on flood and stormwater mitigation. Interesting topic, especially today. I'm sure we all experienced our own floodwater issues as we were driving here to the Dusit Hotel. And to lead us off and to be our facilitator, I am very proud to introduce Senator Sabina Flores Perez, a member of the 37th Guam Legislature. She serves as the Majority Whip and Chairperson for the Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor, Procurement and Statistics, Research and Planning. Senator Perez has provided a critical voice for change to increase effectiveness and responsiveness in government, protecting the public interest, and creating a strong network of community leaders in a shared vision of a sustainable, thriving, and compassionate island family. So as she comes up, we'd also like to call to the stage Captain Brian Bearden again, Vanji Lujan, if you could join us again. And we'd like to also welcome up the Director of Land Management, Joseph Borja, the Director of the Department of Public Works, Vince Areola, and our State Hazard Mitigation Officer at Homeland Security, Ronald Obispo. Please come up and join us at the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Sabina Perez.
This is Masi Ginger for that wonderful introduction. I like how you made a prediction for the next upcoming term. That's okay. All right, so yeah, I would like to, first of all, if we can have the slides set up. So again, I want to thank BSP for organizing this. I know how much work goes into organizing such an event like this, but I think it's very much worth it because I think planning is what's really needed for our community if we are going to move forward in creating sustainable societies. So just to introduce the panelists, some of them are obviously have been doing double duty today. So to my left is Ronald Obispo. He's the State Hazard Mitigation Officer of the Guam Homeland Security, FEMA Region 9. And part of his mission is to reduce the risk to people and property from natural hazards by developing and implementing long-term mitigation measures that will reduce or eliminate the severe effects of future disasters. Through hazard mitigation planning, we can reduce the loss of life and property by minimizing the impact of disasters. It begins by identifying natural disaster risks and vulnerabilities that are common in our area. After identifying these risks, we can develop long-term strategies to break the cycle of disaster damage and reconstruction. The next person over probably needs no reintroduction, but I've had the pleasure of working with Captain Brian Bearden. He works for Guam EPA, or he's assigned to Guam EPA. He's a chief engineer where he oversees Guam EPA's water division. And he's been instrumental to really updating a lot of the regulations that are outdated, that have been in the books for decades. And through his work, we were able to update the Safe Drinking Water Act and make it aligned with the U.S. national standards so that we can regain primacy. So that's really key, but I know he has a lot of work. He's putting a lot of work into updating a lot of the EPA's regulations. And to his left is somebody we all know, Vanji Lujan. She wears many hats in the community, and right now she's GWA's senior regulatory analyst. And so she helps to ensure that GWA is following the proper regulations, which is so critical. So she's also the chair of the Governor of Guam's Climate Change and Resiliency Commission and the co-chair for the Governor's Guam Green Growth Initiative. Vanji is also appointed by the governor as a focal point for the Micronesia Challenge for Guam. And she started her career in government service as the Geographic Information System Manager at the Bureau of Statistics and Plans and was administrator for the Guam Coastal Management Program. To her left is Director Vince Areola from Department of Public Works. And he's another very, very important cabinet member here. He's done a lot of work. Obviously, you see the effects of his work with the paving of the roads, and he's just getting a lot of projects done. If you speak to him, he's just busy. He just completely has a lot of projects, probably doing one right now in his head. The next one over is Director Joe Borja, and he's an amazing person. He has institutional knowledge about land on Guam, and I just wish we could just download whatever's in his brain. Because what he has is so critical as far as land. I think it's a specialty that we need to definitely get our people to learn more about. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is just recap. So when I was asked to be a facilitator, we wanted to do something a little different, and there was a lot of work that was done in regards to identifying the gaps and what are some of the policy options. And so we didn't want to rehash that, but in this case, for the background, I do want to just kind of go over some of the discussion that we had in the past two assemblies. So again, I think this is a good segue into what was discussed earlier, and I'm always a big proponent of holistic planning. And I just want to kind of talk about what indigenous people have done, specifically Hawaiians, and their concept of ahupa'a, which is the way that they manage the land, a watershed that is. And so they were able to live harmoniously with their environment and be able to sustain themselves. So they protected the land as well as sustain themselves simultaneously. And so that idea, I would like to hopefully incorporate that into the way we manage our resources, looking at things in watersheds, in terms of watersheds. And so next slide, please. And so in Guam, Guam is kind of like two islands put together. You have the northern part of Guam, which is predominantly limestone, and so a lot of the water is designed to infiltrate and become groundwater. And then, so what you see here is, in the middle is Weary's map of the different subbasins. So you can imagine them as underground watersheds. The purple one that you see is the largest of the subbasins, is the Jigo-Tumon Trough. And that's, the top of that is Mount Santa Rosa. So imagine all of Dedido, a big part of Dedido, Jigo, drains out into Tumon Bay. And so that also includes Barragata and I think parts of Manilao. So everything that we do above ground can eventually drain into the Tumon Bay area. And this is where we have most of our water wells. There's about 115 water wells, and a large number of them are over this area, in the area in colored purple. And so it's very important to think about which watershed do we live in and how that impacts the water resources, whether it's our drinking water or whether it's the marine environment. Next slide. And so this is just another picture of a specific watershed, and the one that we're in right now, which is part of the Jigo-Tumon Trough. And this is part of what we see, what's happening in this watershed, right, in the lower end of the watershed. Next slide. And so the other part of Guam is southern Guam, and it's again, it's like another island altogether if you look at it geologically. And this one is primarily clay soil, and that means the water has a hard time infiltrating. It's definitely more of a surface water. You see more surface water, and that's where our rivers are generally located. And this is basically the stereotypical type of watershed that we see. And these are all the colored areas are the different watersheds that Weary has identified. Okay, next slide. And so one of the ecosystems within this southern part of Guam is the ravine forests. Next slide. And so some of the issues that we're seeing is the overgrowth of a non-native species, which are the bamboos that causes flooding in that particular watershed. Next slide. And so at this point, I just want to kind of rehash some of the agency roles. And if we can get, I know there's some bullet points up there, and that was taken from the previous meetings that we had. But perhaps maybe I can have the different panelists talk about what the roles are in pertaining to flood prevention. So maybe I'll just go by order of who's closest to me. So Ronald, if you could maybe discuss what the agency's role, at least, or maybe your role in addressing flooding.
Actually, I want to thank you. You actually read my whole mission for me already. But for hazard mitigation under Homeland Security and Civil Defense, you know, we try to identify the severeness of the different floodings all over the island. And more so now, we actually go to those areas and assess them and see what type of projects or strategies we could do to try to avoid it. The one thing that we don't want to do anymore is just do a quick fix. So understanding what the flooding issues are, the causes of the flooding, and then we move forward with most of them are mayors, getting ideas from even DPW or some of the strategies that we currently have to try to mitigate those floodings. So that's our mission in regards to flooding.
Great, great. So I have follow-up questions, but we'll follow along, go down with the panel. So the next one we have Brian Bearden.
Yeah, Guam EPA, we get called on a lot as one of the flood control agencies when floods occur, and you know, we always emphasize that we're not a flood control agency, but what we do have in our regulations is the requirement for all new development to put in on-site stormwater disposal systems. And those do go up to the 25-year, 24-hour storm. And so that is an important role that we have in the mitigation of future flood problems. But it's important to know that that is only during the permitting and construction of new facilities. Nothing in our regulations makes it retroactive to previously developed properties. But when people do come in for what we call a redevelopment, if they have to come in for a building permit, then depending on the scale of that redevelopment, we will require them to put in at least partial system onto their property. But that's that's our main role, and I think oftentimes we are confused for the agency that responds when floods occur and takes action.
Vanjie.
GWA does not have any authority over stormwater, but we are a recipient of a lot of stormwater into our system. On Guam, we do not have a combined system. Our wastewater is strictly a wastewater system, but through aging infrastructure and areas where people open up their clean out and they allow their property to drain within our system, we end up with a thing called sanitary sewer overflows, which is when the sewer system through the manhole, you see it sometimes bubbling. That's sewer. So please stay out of it. And it's caused by, a lot of it, of our system is caused from flooding during heavy rainstorms.
Thank you, Senator. At DPW, we are, I believe we've got like 3 roles. The first one, of course, is permitting. We make sure that in all our permitting activities that flooding issues or potential flooding issues are addressed. And then, of course, we have our current maintenance program to make sure that flooding remains controlled as much as possible. But, you know, truth be told, we are playing catch up. We've had flooding issues for the last 40 years that just for some reason, either the folks that be or folks at whether they be at DPW or EPA, and the residents just kind of like put up with it, right? And so we've had these for the last 30, 40 years. And so we've been addressing them. And I can talk a little about that later. And then the third part, of course, is enforcement. That if there are any major flooding issues that are caused by humans, by development, by commercial activities, you know, we work with the EPA, as Captain Brian had talked about, to address those issues.
Thank you, Director. Director Joe Borja.
Thank you, Vince. I think you guys may have used up all my lines here. The Department of Land Management statutes and regulations focus on land use. Through the subdivision and parceling process, general requirements for subdivision are to provide for sufficient drainage of the land to provide reasonable protection against flooding. In a Guam Land Use Commission approved subdivision, storm drainage facilities shall be provided in all subdivisions in accordance with plan preparation by the subdivider, conforming to criteria established by the Commission in the subdivision law. These facilities shall be designed to dispose of normal storm water falling on the subdivision without hazard of flooding, inconvenience of ponding, and the erosion of public or private lands. So that's where we don't really deal at land management per se with flooding. It's through the Land Use Commission that we impose some of these restrictions. And as Commander or Captain Bearden said, these are progressive going forward. We can't enforce backwards. And of course, the enforcement of the zoning law is DPW, building official. So that's the part that we play on here.
Okay, thank you for those introductions about your roles. So next slide, please. And so these are some of the major gaps. I don't know if you can see it from where you're sitting, but these are some of the highlights from the previous assemblies. So one of the things that was brought up is that the subdivision, basically it pertains to developments that are six residences or more. And so there's much stricter requirements, as Director Borja was talking about, that they have to ensure that there's drainage infrastructure for those types of developments. But when it comes to developments that are under 6 homes, there is less oversight, from what I understand. They do review the plan, but they don't require, there's no requirement for any kind of drainage infrastructure. And then, so there's that, the piecemealing of development can lead to these cumulative effects. And then the other thing was post-construction regulations. There's nothing in law that requires any type of installation to address flooding issues. And basically a lot of the work is the front end, so the permitting, they have to review the plans, ensure that the construction is following those plans. But when it comes time to the actual functioning of those developments, there's nothing in law that would hold the owner of that property should there be flooding issues. And then as of now, there's no lead agency. So like you heard, Director Borja oversees the plans for the land use plan, or at least ensure the zoning law, it complies with zoning laws. but as far as enforcement, it's DPW. So there's no one agency that really controls that. Is there anything else that you would like to add to this as far as some of the major gaps? I caught them pretty much. Okay.
Yeah, just one other big gap, and that's especially for the subdivisions and the ones that fall under the threshold and the piecemeal development, is that the Guam EPA regulations have always had held an exemption for the development of a single family's home, and that's always been implemented. So there's never been historically a requirement that these single homes, as they get developed one by one, to put in any kind of a stormwater control system. And I think that's one of the big leading contributors to this cumulative impact that we see out there. So that's one of the other big gaps.
Thank you for that. Anything else? Okay. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so these are some of the flood prevention options. And so there's a whole bunch. And again, you know, a lot of these are maybe difficult to implement, but there are many things to choose from. So changes to the review process is one, where there is one suggestion where they can look at the maps. So in addition to looking at the paper maps, because I remember they said the pretty pictures, right? You can look at the pretty pictures, but how does it really function on the site? So maybe having a dual review where you have Department of Land Management look at the maps, and then Department of Public Works looks at the site and does the actual percolation tests, and they look at the topography on site to kind of identify where the problem areas might be. So using that information. The other thing is the incentivizing low impact development. So green infrastructure, a lot of that was talked about earlier in the previous panel. So incentivizing those types of things where it reduces the amount of impervious areas, which can lead to flooding. And that's where, development by design will lead to, you're compacting the land. So that water that's hitting the earth is going to flow rather than infiltrate. So, the smaller the footprint, maybe the better it would be. So the other thing is design standards for fences. So there's no design standard currently, but maybe we can update those standards. We could talk to Brent maybe in regards to allowing flow through rather than just a massive water, massive movement of water. There's many different ideas and designs that can be done to help mitigate flooding. And of course, policy changes. A lot of this would require policy changes. So designating a lead flood control agency, changing rules to include retroactive installation, and then funding, how we're going to get the funding. And one of the ideas is creating a utility, stormwater utility with funding mechanism. So these are not necessarily easy things to accomplish, but these are options. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what we're going to do now is more of a application. And so we put together we identified 2 sites, one in the north and one in the south. And being that we have a very esteemed panel here and a very knowledgeable panel, I would like to hopefully get their input as what each agency can do to address these flooding issues. And so I did provide some questions in advance for them to think about. So the 2 sites that we chose, the north is in Barragata, so it's at Leon Guerrero Street in Barragata. And so we'll talk about that one first, and maybe we can have Director Borja kind of characterize the site, and then we can have input from all the panelists to see how should we troubleshoot this flooding, this area that has flooding. Director Borja. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much, Senator. Are we going to start on the sites? Oh, there we go.
Yeah. So this is the larger map. Just to give you a bearing, sorry, excuse me. So yeah, this is I don't know if you can identify where this is in Barragata, but you see that towards the top, there's the Untalan Middle School, right? So you'll, it's Untalan Middle School, but we're gonna focus on the highlighted area. So that's where the flooding occurs. So next slide. oh, sorry, this should have been first, but yeah, this kind of gives you a bearing. So there's Wendy's, and that's the area down there. Next slide. And so now we're zooming in that area. So, sorry, Director, if you don't mind kind of characterizing the site.
Okay, I do have some graphics there, AV guys, if you can show it up, Leon Guerrero folder. Take a look at 2021 Leon Guerrero Street. And as the Senator said, this is the area in Lejang. And, let me get my graphics up here. (2021) Leon Guerrero Street. There we go. So that's Leon Guerrero Street. Well, it left. First off, in this presentation, if I could have a little bit more of your time, isn't it a great day for a flooding symposium? And Ed, I'm not going to take roll call this afternoon, right, after lunch. But thank you for your time, though, for returning. This is Leon Guerrero Street in Lejang. Okay, yeah, leave it there for a few minutes. See the V on the bottom? That's Leon Guerrero Street heading up. And it goes up, and you make a right-hand turn, and you go all the way in. And it curves up to a house there on top, and then a house further in with the nice big green lawn. Well, between those two houses, you see that green hole there in the middle? That's actually a hole. I mean, it's 30 feet deep and about 60 to 90 feet wide. And that's in the area. Flooding occurs in the whole area. Some of it is mitigated by that hole. Can we go back to the 1994? Take a look at the size of that hole and the development around that. Now, can we go back to, okay, this is the 1994 photograph of that area. And that area didn't flood in 1994 because there were less houses in the area and they had that big, huge hole there. So that hole today shrunk, guess down to about maybe 20%, 25% of its original size. But that's how Leon Guerrero Street and that area looked in 1994. And take a look at down on the bottom left on the V, if we could go back to the 2018 photograph. 2018. Just go back to your list and look for 2018. Okay, that's good. These are the lot lines and the topo lines. And here you can see that hole, that ponding basin, whatever it is, collection area for water. You can see it on that one lot. It's a private lot. But if you remember the 1994 photograph and you take a look at that V area down in the bottom, you see now two new houses on that left-hand side of Leon Guerrero Street. And also next to it, you see a 50-foot easement. But the easement seems a little bit misaligned. And then if you follow that easement going up, you see that the easement on top goes across a roof. That's where the easement to that property. But this project started out by one of the landowners in the bottom right-hand corner, if you can see the hammerhead, wanting to get access to her property, legal access, and asked DPW to come in to open up the road. Well, it wasn't that easy really to open up a road because first place, Lejang Road is misaligned, the Leon Guerrero Street is misaligned, and as it goes around the corner there, it seems to cut through a garage made on the property. And then of course it goes in and eventually, hopefully ends up at that hammerhead. But those four properties in the middle there Lot 1090-2-1 and 1090-2-3. Those are government properties now that the government of Guam exchanged in order to expand that ponding basin so that flooding can be taken care of in the area. The exact lot where that ponding basin is, that round muddy water there, that actually belongs to a private property owner, and so does the property below it. Years ago, Gov Guam and the municipality of Barrigada, through the mayor, tried to condemn the whole area to turn it into a ponding basin so that all the water can be directed into that property. The house to the left with the nice white roof was recently built in, I believe, between 2006 and 2010. And before they built that, that house, they knew that that area was flood prone. So what did they do? They built up the property. And of course, the water went through the other low area right next to it and naturally flowed over towards the ponding basin. So the water flow goes through that one lot there and on lot 101-R2, and it's endangering the foundation of that house in there. And then you see the front property there where the entrance is to Leon Guerrero Street, that the street actually goes through private property. And if we can go to a 2018, another 2018 shot. Okay, again, you can see that area without the property lines. And go ahead and work backwards now. 2018 to the next. And then 2060 with the topo. That kind of shows the topography of the area. But also interestingly, across the street there where there are nice colored things, those are called wetlands. That's Lake Barrigada over on that side. And of course, that's on the other side of the road. So the water flows from Route 10, it flows west. It doesn't go to the other side where there's a natural lake, I guess, in that area. So let's go behind 2016. What's the next one before that? Okay, and this is in 2010. And as you can see in the 2010, this is the first photograph that I was able to find that showed the construction of that new house there, right by the V of entrance to Leon Guerrero Street. But as you can see further inland, further in that street, the ponding basin is now covered up with grass and whatever, and may have turned into a wetlands now. So let's see the one in 2004 or 2006. That's where the house is not there yet. It wasn't built until after 2006. But you can see that the owner of that property has begun to lay some coral, aggregate, whatever, to bring up the level of that property because he knows already from previous experience that that lot actually floods and holds the water and doesn't cross Leon Guerrero Street to go to the other side.
Okay, so Director Borja, so in your position as in land management, if the owner were going to build the house, prior to building the house, you would have missed this, right? Because it's not in the regulations.
It's not in the regulation, and as Captain Bearden said, you know, for these single homes that are built, there's really no regulation on it. However, sometimes when you build on your own property, using it for what you want, you could inadvertently cause flooding to the adjoining lots, even if you're just building, you know, one house, as the case may be here.
Okay, thank you. And so, Director Arreola, being the agency that oversees, has the enforcement capability, is there anything that your agency can do to address the situation?
I think Captain Bearden brought it up. Typically, we have the subdivision rules, right? That's 6 or more houses. I think we're at that stage where my personal thing is every house that gets built on Guam has to contain their water. Because what's happening is in certain areas, especially throughout Barrigada, Barrigada is probably the worst place in terms of topography. There's all kinds of flood area. It could be a short-term flood. It'll flood for about 6 or 7 inches, and it's gone in about 2 hours. Or otherwise, you could have a flood, and it'll last for 2 days. Just depends on the area in Barrigada. But on my desk, I can tell you right now, I probably have like about 20 areas that flood just in Barrigada. And so what happens is a house gets built, and they're a little bit okay. Then another house gets built, they're okay. By the time you start getting to house number 3, 4, 5, especially if they're in a cul-de-sac or if they're in a low-lying area, all of a sudden the water starts puddling outside their home or alongside the road. And once they see flooding start to creep up, they start to build fences, concrete fences, to keep the water out of their property. But the water still comes. And then all of a sudden you're going to have like a cul-de-sac or a portion of the road that may be depressed, and all of a sudden you have major flooding. But it wasn't treated as a subdivision. No one was required to put a ponding basin. You just had the normal effects of development and single home construction. So a lot of that is happening all throughout the island. When it comes to addressing flooding, the first thing we look for is seeing if we can tie it into an existing stormwater system. We're doing that right now at Westbrook Road in Barrigada. That's pretty much across the Antolon School there. That had flooding at maybe, let's call it 50%, right? Well, a homeowner built his home there, saw the flooding, and just put up a concrete wall. That flooding doubled overnight. And so what we're left to do is there's flooding in the road, probably at a foot today that we saw. And so good part is there's a stormwater drainage system about 60, 70 feet away. We're going to be able to tie that in. But if there's no stormwater drain, our next plan is I start calling Joe. Joe, I need some government property to put perhaps an infiltration system in there, perhaps a ponding basin on the side of the road. So those are the options that we have right now. But you can't just put in an infiltration chamber system in one day. There's a lot of regulatory issues that we got to deal with. There's a lot of utility issues we got to deal with, and ownership issues right away, things of that nature. So it's difficult. We certainly see the results of development throughout the island. Most especially in Barrigada, Mongmong, some in Tumon as well, and Tumuning.
So you also implement a stormwater manual. So my understanding, there's 2 stormwater manuals, one that DPW enforces and one that Guam EP enforces. Is that correct? So what's it within your purview how would you basically address this problem using the tools and the authorities that you have? Is there something that you can do to address this?
Well, enforcement-wise and addressing it wise, we do have the MS4 permit program that we're currently under. For those of you who don't know, MS4 stands for Municipal Separate Stormwater Sewer System. Yeah. And so we just got permitted by US EPA about 2 years ago. It's an 8-year permit, but we are required, in a nutshell, to ensure that all stormwater that gets drained into our oceans is as clean as possible. Very basic. So that includes all the stormwater drains along Marine Drive, along all the major routes. The stormwater coming off the rivers that go into our oceans have to be as clean as possible. So that's a lot of work. It's identifying our assets, which are the stormwater drains. It's cleaning out those assets. It's having a maintenance program, and it's making sure that what goes into those stormwater drains is basically stormwater. You can't have grass clippings, plastic bottles, industrial solvents, oils, things of that nature. So it's a long comprehensive plan that we're in charge of.
And so who monitors that? Is it US EPA or Guam EPA does the monitoring of that?
Some of it, well, I believe US EPA, our local EPA will assist us with the testing, but the responsibility is on DPW. The permit is with DPW.
Okay. So again, what would you do to address the flooding issue here? Is there something specifically that you can do as an agency with this?
Well, like I mentioned, a lot of these floods have been here for 40, 30, 40 years, right? The way to address it is, you know, as I mentioned, we have to take, the water is going to go where it wants to go. So we have to take that water, those flood waters, to either a ponding basin, an infiltration chamber system, existing stormwater system, and that's really all we can do. If we're thinking of pumping water every time it floods, we'll be there all day. So it's a matter of looking at where the flood areas are, finding out where there are government properties. If there are no government properties, it might involve land taking to put in a system to catch the water and dispose of the water, as Joe had mentioned in one of the properties right there. And so, you know, there's usually like 4 or 5 options to address the stormwater system.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, hold on, Joe. I just want to make sure I get all the panelists in. Vanjie, so any input or insight into addressing this issue?
I think that we had mentioned this in the previous workshop, the previous session about watershed management. And this is an example of utilizing watershed management to control water and erosion. So I think that it's time that we start looking at, as Mr. Borja mentioned and Vincent mentioned, each individual landowner has to be responsible for the water on their property. And so I just would like to put a plug in for the School of Engineering, the University of Guam. They are really trying to have their engineers more, have the tools to develop using low impact design. And so that's something that they're looking at in terms of using bioswales, vegetative buffers, other things. I mean, it just really depends how much water is here to what type of a system. But I think that looking at a cumulative effect when individual homes are going to be built, and then also trying to utilize low impact designs, permeable pavement, other things that will allow the water to go down into the aquifer versus being spread out on surfaces instead.
Thank you, Vanjie. Brian, do you have any insights on solving this issue?
Yeah, well, this is a great example because you picked the hardest to solve type of situation that we have on Guam, where the development has occurred already. Guam EPA can't go back in, as far as we know, we can't go back in and force people to retroactively install stuff. What we should be doing is looking forward and trying to get this problem, prevent it from happening in the first place. And there's some real structural problems with the way individual home construction is accomplished here in Guam. And I'm going to list out a few of those right now, because I think that'll help lead us towards some of the solutions. One of those is that it comes in one piece at a time, and the reviewers at both DPW and Guam EPA, they see, the drawing they see shows, if they're lucky, only the topography of the lot in question. It doesn't show the surrounding area. So unless you've done your research or you happen to know the history of these neighborhoods, those plan reviewers, engineer or not, are not going to catch this problem. And so that leads to the question of who's responsible then for catching this problem. You know, should it be the government? There is an answer for that, and the answer is that the person who designed that house, who put their stamp on that plan, be it an architect or an engineer, they are responsible for that entire drawing. They're paid to do it. They're supposed to be on that site. They're supposed to do that research and find out where the water flows. And it's not happening. And one of the reasons that I believe is not happening, and we touched on this in the last session, is we've been keeping very careful records at Guam EPA for the last 3 years and analyzing those statistically. And what we've noticed is that about 60+% of all the single-family home permits that come through our office are stamped by just 4 or maybe 5 engineers and architects. And looking at the other engineers and architects that stamp about 95% of them, we know who they are, and we know that they're all moonlighters, is what they're called, right? They're stamping plans as a side business. They might have a full-time job with the government somewhere else. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. That can be done in a responsible fashion, but we see people, as I mentioned in the last session, that are stamping over 100 plans, 100 permits a year, and others that are within that top 5. It goes from 50-something up to 100. There's no way that these particular engineers and architects are able to do the amount of work that they should be doing. And as a government, one of the things that we do to protect the public from these types of problems is we license engineers and architects, and that license proves that that engineer and architect is qualified. They have the education, they have the experience, they've passed a test There's 3 tests, that, 3 basic qualifications they have to meet to get licensed. Our staff know. They talk to the people that design these homes. The people that are actually doing these designs are not the engineers that are stamping them. They're drafters, they're designers, they're contractors. They're the ones who come into our office to make these small corrections from our side. So we have this problem from the very top to the bottom of the construction industry in Guam. And it's, we could revoke the license of those 5 engineers, but there would be another 5 engineers that would take their place because the market is leading toward that. People want cheap engineering. These guys are doing it for a fraction of the cost of a real engineering firm. And so the contractors are going to continue going for that. So we have to do something about the industry to force them to follow the rest of our laws that deal with development and to honor the professional licensing of the architects and engineers on the island. And Vanjie, I'm glad you brought up the School of Engineering. We're pumping out all these engineer graduates. What market, what business are they going to have if 60% of that business is taken up by a handful of, frankly, unethical engineers? So kind of a long answer to your question, but to get back to the point here, if that was being done correctly, and if the architect and engineer was looking at each one of those lots and driving out to that site, doing some basic research, talking to the neighbors, are there flooding problems in this neighborhood? At the very least, they could warn that person that's building that, hey, you're in the low spot here, that house gets flooded, and I can't responsibly build a wall around that or I'll flood your neighbors, and then they can start looking for other options. But we do also have the other options that Vince mentioned. We could start requiring individual stormwater systems on every single lot, and just to make a correction of what was said earlier, there are requirements. Every single project in Guam is required to do that. It's just that there's exemptions in Guam EPA's regulations, which may be applied by the administrator. So the administrator could revoke those exemptions at any time. And when we have found situations where we know there's a problem, we have required those systems to be put in. There's another neighborhood just, I think it's farther down this area, where we happen to know that there's a flooding problem because somebody spoke up to us. And we saw one person who was developing, I believe it was 5 lots in that area, and we required them to put in French drains, like a gravel pit, to try to take care of some of that runoff. And that person went and tried to sell some of those lots and come back and say, well, now it's less than 5 lots, I don't need to do this. And we held their feet to the fire and made them do that. So it can be done. We have the tools, we need to do it. We just need the will to do it, and the industry needs to step up as well and start doing their part of it as well and not just put it all in the government.
Thank you, Brian. So Ronald, I know you were talking earlier about your role in actually troubleshooting these different flooding areas. And so one of the questions I had to you, but also I want your insight, is so do you address only flood map areas that are mapped to experience floods, or do you actually deal with these localized flooding issues as well?
We also do a lot of local. In fact, Barragata is on my top 3 list of different things I have to mitigate on, and it's very, very difficult. I agree. We need to cut this in the front. Right now, all we're doing is it's happening, and then we're trying to fix it, and we're going through DPW, who's trying to redirect the water towards drainage areas. One thing that we haven't talked about is as these houses are developed, and either they are flat roofs or angled roof, their roof wash-off becomes very strong and pushes towards a certain area. So it goes in different directions. Unfortunately, the homeowners, when they develop their homes, and let's say they apply for a mortgage on this, one of the banks require for them to do a flooding assessment. And once they're told, yeah, you're in a flood zone, exactly right, the first thing they do is they lift it. Avoid all of that, but have no further thinking past their property line and what will happen. So we're in a bit of a catch-22 there, and here we are. My part is to try to fund the solutions to these floodings to avoid further floodings down the road, but it's hard. We can try to do a drainage or a few investments that we have to do, but in the long run, as these houses develop in close vicinity of each other, it'll continue to do so. So enforcement from the very beginning, like these fly-by-night architects or designers, make them accountable for it. And if the flooding occurs down the road and it's founded that they were the ones who developed this house. Make them still be accountable for it for the life of the house, basically. That's one way. I mean, force them. But who knows if they're even going to be in existence within 5 years after building the house.
Okay, so there's something already in law that we can do, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that.
Well, the other thing also is, take a look at our building codes and how we can include these guys and to affect these guys into that. We talked about enforcement on DPW side, and we understand, and we're actually looking at finding ways where we can help you maybe even do some trainings for more enforcement officers or personnel, right? So we're actually in conversations with GCC on it, on that idea of doing that.
Okay, so I know we're running out of time, but I do want to get to the second case study. But really quickly, I know, Joe, you had a follow-up?
Yes, if the AV guys could put up 2018 Leon Guerrero Street lot owners slide picture, whatever you call it. In this particular case, there is a possible solution, which is basically creating a watershed in that area. And we're fortunate in that area that there was some previous work by Mayor June Blas in working to acquire 2 private lots in there, which Guam did. So there are 2 lots, 2018 Leon Guerrero Street lot owners. Yes, that one. So here it shows Legend Road, Leon Guerrero Street, and then it shows the lot owners in that area. And 2 of them are Guam already has. The 2 other landowners there, Scambiluri, who owns the actual hole in the ground there, that belongs to an estate, so it's taking a little time to get that thing to a condition where it can be sold or acquired by the government. The lot below it is owned by Felix Babauta. Mr. Babauta has lived in the States for about, I think, 50 years. And he would like a land exchange in the area or to buy the lot from him. So both of those lots are technically on the market for government acquisition. If the government acquires those 4 lots, it could certainly develop a nice bonding basin, watershed area, and still provide the access road into the very last landowner there, the Villagomez family there. That's way in there. So in this particular case, there is a solution. But as you know, alienation and disposition of public lands or purchasing condemnation of private property needs legislative intervention, Senator. Thank you for that.
Vanjie?
I just wanted to mention that, or say that, similar to like water or sewer, I'm assuming there is no stormwater system in this area. And I think that we're not talking about that, but I think that that's probably the next thing that we really need to do is areas can't be developed unless there is stormwater. And the other thing that under our own authority, if there were stormwater and people sometimes you go up into Dededo and you'll see people have these grates in their houses. It's to drain the water, and then they illegally connect to our system. We can find that out, and we have a big hammer. We turn their water off, and you will see how fast they can figure out a solution for that.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. So we're going to move on to the south. Next slide. And this is Finelli Creek, I believe, in Huggett. So, Director Barr, I don't know if you wanted to kind of characterize this site and the flooding in that area. In Huggett.
Oh, Huggett is in the Yeah.
Do you have a solution already?
Finelli Street area. And this is basically really up coastal zone management issue. If you could, AV guys, gentlemen, if you could put up the Finelli Creek outfall. So this is the Finili Creek outfall, that beautiful fan you see up on the left-hand corner of the photograph. That's where the water from Finili Creek comes up, and I think that's under Edwin's jurisdiction. But in between the two red lines of that gray-green area in the middle there, there's a bunch of landowners, and they've come to land management asking what do they need to put up a retaining wall on the rear portion of their property abutting Finili Creek. I didn't have an answer for them. That's probably an Army Corps of Engineers issue. But my experience with trying to block a river or a creek by putting a retaining wall is good luck if it lasts, past the rainy season, because you're going to have to develop it all the way up and not just that one portion. And so you can channel the water that doesn't erode the river banks or the creek banks. But you also have to look at the end, where it's going to come out of. And that nice little fan area there, that's where the water comes out. And I think Edwin has a lot to say about that particular issue of draining the water from Finili Creek over there into the outfall. So that's really not per se a flooding issue, although in times of heavy rains and that the rains do tend to erode some of the property, the rear property boundary lines on it. And this lady came in and asked, she wanted to put up a retaining wall, but just on her portion of her property, and kind of told him to go ask Vince to put in that thing in there. And then after you see Vince, Captain Bearden would have something to say about that, and Edwin would probably have something to say at the end there. So that's a flooding problem also, but that's not just dealing with flooding on your property. It's where that water goes at the end there that has a big problem with developing a culvert or a system to drain that orderly, but still it's got to go out there by the coast.
So there's a lot of erosion that's happening in the outfall area?
There's a lot of erosion that's happening along the creek, all these property lines along the red street line there. There's a lot of erosion on there, and landowners, of course, want to protect their properties. But I don't know that putting a retaining wall right on your rear property line, it may solve your issue for a few months or till the next rainy season, but it certainly doesn't solve the overall issue of Finili Creek. I know that Army Corps of Engineers has done a study on that, but I'm not sure what came off of that study.
Thank you so much, Director.
I have.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Actually, the good news is the guys at BSP and Coastal are actually looking at this and actually has a grant to do a feasible study for restoration of the deterioration of that creek. In doing so, it may slow down the flow of water and avoid that, but that homeowner also at the same time is encroaching into the actual path of that river creek. So if it does put a retaining wall, all it's going to do is going to go left or right, and then the property owners on the left and the right will have that same question, if I can put a retaining wall. So, but it is in progress, sir. So we're going to try to resolve this issue, but it needs to go through a feasible study first.
Great, thank you for that. Brian, does Guam Pay look at this property, or have you seen this property already?
Personally, this is the first I've heard of this property, so I don't know enough about it to say much. But other than just looking at the development that's come up around it, I'm assuming that there's no drainage system in that neighborhood to the side. So it's again a very similar kind of situation where all the cumulative development has impacted these unfortunate people that live near the bottom of that creek, and it's very difficult to deal with when you get to that point.
And so, but as far as Guam EPA, you would look at erosion controls
Well, Guam EPA's erosion control regulations, again, that they are written as construction regulations. So if someone's constructing, then the erosion control regulations apply. But and we try to tell people try to come to us and say, hey, can't you do something about these off-roaders or whatever, and the regulations don't cover that. It doesn't say that anyone doing any activity in Guam cannot cause erosion. It just doesn't cover it.
And it doesn't cover fences too, right?
Well, construction, right? So if you're doing construction and it requires a building permit, then you have to look at that, and then we can start kicking in some of our requirements. And one of the requirements that is related to fences, in fact, is there is a requirement in the erosion control regulations that say that none of the construction or grading performed on a lot may cause any adverse impact to your neighbor's lot in terms of changing the flow of water or the deposition of silt. And so we've begun putting that in as a permit condition, and so that we do have a way to come in later in the future if they do cause these problems. But that was never put in as a permit condition before. And I think the interpretation of that is if the permit was issued, Guam EPA approved it. So that's a tough one. Again, you have to see it when it's happening. But at least now we're putting that in there as a permit condition.
Okay, thank you. Vanjie, do you have any insights into this project?
I just have a question, actually. So is it the same thing like septic tanks, that if you are in an area prone to flooding or within the downstream of areas that you will get flooded, the amount of property for you to build a house is different? Or do we have that in our regulation at all, where it manages, knowing full well that we do have a rainy season and a dry season, that the lot size is for development is dependent on your, maybe if you're going to be flooded or not? Is that something?
I don't think so, but I think Director Borja could, that's the zoning law, right?
I don't think there's any reference to usable land. You may have 1,000 square meters, but it may not all be usable. But I don't think there's any regulations or anything that says because you're next to a river creek that your setback has to be more. I know they have that in commercial properties abutting a residential property. You have your lot line, and then you also have another setback that you have to put 20 feet in, but that's because of the commercial activity. They're not, something like that. So definitely that can be looked at. Similar to the fact that if you build a house, you don't have to have a fire hydrant. I think that in the building permit process, building plans, if you're building a house, I think either you or the contractor should be required to provide a fire hydrant for that house, wherever it may be. We have some houses in Barrigada, 4 or 5 houses that don't have access to a fire hydrant, at least not less than 200 feet away. And they're asking, can the government put that in? But something like that can be put into the regulations, as well as the issue that Vanjie put up. It's maybe some of the planners and the realtors might not agree with that, but it does help prevent future problems, to future landowners. I've heard of houses in Barrigada that's been sold like 2 or 3 times for a cheap price. And why? Because it was flooding, and people scoop it up and buy it in the hopes of mitigating it or getting some land exchange from the government. But we already know that area is prone to flooding. And some of those houses were bought with or built with federal funds. And as Commander Bearden said, or Ron said, only now do some banks require that there be a flooding report, attached to your construction plans.
Okay, thank you for that input. Director Arriola, is there anything you wanted to add to the?
I think it's several things. New homeowners who are looking to construct, they have to really be diligent in where they're looking to buy, where they're looking to build. My personal case, when I remember 20 years ago, I told my dad I'm buying a house in Barrigada. First thing he said was, no, you're not buying a house in Barrigada. He didn't even know where it was, just because he grew up in Barrigada, so he knows the area. So sure, he came out and we looked at it, looked at the topography, you look at the hillsides, you look at talk to the neighbors, does it flood here? I think that kind of due diligence is really much needed. We've seen so many individuals today that are building homes in low-lying areas. They know they're going to get flooded. They know it, but they, and it could be just a function of economics, right? That's perhaps a property that was given to them by the family, it was deeded to them, or they bought it cheap or whatever. That's the property that they have. But you have to really understand what happens when we're in a tropical island. The rain is a fact of life, and you're going to have to deal with it one way or another. When Joe was talking about several homes I know myself, that they flip over 2, 3, 4 times. They're probably sold during the dry season when it's not flooded, and then 7, 8 months later it gets flooded and the person just moves out. So I think due diligence on the part of homeowners who are looking to construct or build, that has to really occur. They have to know exactly where they're buying and building.
I also think that maybe we need to, because certain people cannot relocate, they can't retreat. That's the same situation we have with climate change and infrastructure. But maybe it's a new design. I know the traditional design for Old Chamorro homes is they're all elevated, right? They're elevated on stilts. And I know that in some jurisdictions, for areas prone to flooding, that's the design. You don't go back to what we see now, which is the house on the ground. And our own tradition is that the house was elevated. So I think maybe our architects can come up with nice, super cool designs elevated above to address, because what we don't want, one of the things about flooding is really allowing that water to go where it naturally goes. And maybe we just accept the fact that these areas are going to flood, but we can design it better to mitigate it, or to ensure that the property that we own is not going to erode away.
Okay, thank you. And I know we're almost out of time, but I just want to run through some questions so we can go to the next couple slides. And this could be a discussion as you mingle with the audience. So some of the questions that I asked, how do we address flooding in terms of climate change? Next slide. How can Guam move forward with proactive sustainable land use policies? And I think we discussed that earlier in the previous panel. And what funding sources are available to address flooding? So these are some questions that we can probably take offline and discuss further. But I do want to open up to the audience if there's any questions for the panelists here regarding flooding issues. But I do want to thank you for, we had these 2 case studies and you were able to actually solve the problem. So give them a hand. And I think this definitely shows that, interagency, this is something I really would like to see more of, is this interagency collaboration, and you could see it taking place. And so thank you so much. So any questions from the audience? Maybe we could take one question.
In previous conferences, we talked about a flooding czar. Somebody who would oversee everything and kind of group all the organizations and agencies together. Whatever happened to that concept?
Well, that was one of the recommendations, but yeah, I think.
Did we get stuck?
People designated probably DPW potentially.
I can tell you right now, that is a full-time job, especially where we are today.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned earlier, we're just playing catch up with 30, 40 years of flooding in various areas of the island. And it's not just roads, but it's rivers, it's creeks, it's homes, it's hillsides, things of that nature. That's almost a full-time job, full-time division actually to take care of, and a lot of money, and a lot of policy change, as we've discussed over the last hour here. A lot of policy change.
So I just want to tell Vince, if that's your job, you only have to worry about it 6 months out of the year. The rest of it, nobody's going to bother you when it's dry season. But I think that that we have an opportunity, I think, with the infrastructure bill and then the climate change bill that was just signed by the president today, right? Or yesterday. And I know that everybody looks at the infrastructure in terms of water and power, but they're not necessarily, and solar panels, but maybe this is an opportunity for us to have this real conversation about putting stormwater in these highly prone residential areas where funding is very limited opportunities. And so I hope that Tyrone could probably cover this tomorrow if this is an opportunity to really beef up that infrastructure as climate change becomes more prevalent.
Right. Thank you so much for being here today, and I'm looking forward to the future conversations. So thank you so much. This ends our panel.